We hear so often about mass shootings, like the one that I mentioned slightly earlier that tore my community apart, and the communities of many of my colleagues here whose families lost loved ones to the senseless and unfathomable heartbreak of the tragedy in Isla Vista just 3 or 4 months ago in May of this year. How often must we wring our hands and ask, well, what if, and speculate what might have been done or what we can do in the future to stop this kind of senseless tragedy. AB 1014 gives us an answer. A gun violence restraining order to prevent gun violence before it happens. Now, colleagues, I'm sure there have been many efforts to try to discourage people from supporting this common sense measure. But this item is modeled directly after the domestic violence restraining orders that we have in the state of California that protect people from anger and potential violence. It's an opportunity to take guns away from people who are in moments of distress, mental illness, anger. And this bill provides the same kind of protection, which is why law enforcement and family members and people close often see the warning signs, as they do in these domestic violence situations, often see the warning signs first when their loved ones, when individuals whom they have known and cared for and watched for years pose a danger to themselves and to others. And in the current state of the law, they are unable to do anything. And yet, so many of these people have firearms immediately available to them. In so many of these cases, we are unable by law to do anything to limit their access to firearms while help or treatment is either needed or being sought. It's not true, as some argue, that the mental health system offers an adequate and preferable alternative. As we have seen, our mental health system in this state is so inadequate at this point in time. First, the 5150 process, which has been referenced, requires that the person be diagnosed with a mental disorder in order to be detained for being a danger to oneself or others. Secondly, the 5150 system focuses on the wrong target. It's not mental illness that makes a person dangerous. It's a person's dangerous behavior that makes him and her or her a danger to themselves or others. That's why this bill is supported by Disability Rights California and the American Association of Suicidology and the California Psychiatric Association and our state police chiefs support this measure because it focuses on the right target. This bill, as I mentioned, is easy to implement. It is modeled on an existing system that has worked and saved lives, and that is what this bill is also designed to do. As I mentioned, the State Sheriff's Association supports, the California Chiefs Association, our Attorney General Association, the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence supports this measure. And the worst thing that can happen in this bill is that if someone whose guns are taken away from them was done in error, the worst that can happen is that they have to wait 21 days to get their guns back. But if your child is taken away from you, as has happened to people who are here with us today, as has happened in so many of our communities, if that happens, you can never get those children back. I would urge your aye vote on this measure to provide family members and law enforcement with an important new legal tool to help prevent gun violence before it happens. I think we would all agree that the loss of a child is about the greatest tragedy that one could imagine. The idea that we could save families from the agony by passing this legislation modeled on existing legislation, if it can save one life, one family from that agony, it will be worth it. This is a fair and common sense measure. This is a measure that will add a layer of protection in a society that has become so prone to gun violence, for whom we hear almost on a daily basis situations where we are finding these kinds of mass tragedies and deaths. They are unnecessary, and this bill can assure that we can protect our families, our friends, our communities, our state, because after all, what is the purpose of government? It is to protect its people, both from external enemies and internal forces. This bill will do just that, and it does it in a way that is going to assure we can protect your children, my children, and those of our communities, our constituents. I have people here today who lost loved ones in a senseless tragedy because this bill wasn't in effect. To paraphrase what Mr. Martinez said right after his son's brutal murder, he said, "When does the right to own a gun trump my son's right to life?" I don't have an answer to that question. I don't think anybody in good conscience can answer that question by saying that the right to own a gun trumps a young man's right to live. So we're here today. I want to thank the author of this bill, who I know has been working on this issue for quite some time, and her principal co-author, Doss Williams, who grew up in Isla Vista. So he has a very personal relationship with that community, as do I as the senator representing it, as do many of you who I have learned over the course of the last year or two, either are gauchos yourself, had the experience of going to college and living in Isla Vista, or have children or family members who also were gauchos, and proudly so. But we lost 6 gauchos through the acts of a young man who didn't have a criminal record. No criminal record. The man in Newtown, that young man, had no criminal record. The young man in Aurora had no criminal record. So you see, this isn't about taking guns from criminals who we know are criminals. These people aren't criminals until they kill these people. How do you tell that to the parents who have lost these children because of this loophole in the law? How do you tell that to the Rogers parents who were desperately trying to get this young man some help? His parents, who loved him, wanted to get him some help, but there was nothing in the law to allow that to happen. And as a result, we have grieving families here today. It is time that we put some logic and some common sense and some rationality into the way we treat these acts of violence, the way we treat gun ownership, the way we recognize that people who have anger management issues, who have mental health issues, and who have access to guns can create the kind of toxic stew that results in the agony of families who have unnecessarily lost their loved ones, who no longer will be able to pursue life, liberty, or happiness. This is a common sense bill. This bill is something that could help each and every one of us and our loved ones, and is a bill that deserves to pass this House and be signed by the governor into law, and I would urge your aye vote.